Welcome back to Tongue of the Serpent. By this point in the season, New Orleans has already shown us that not every threshold looks like a door. Some are objects, some are names, some are bargains, and some are streets, corners, and little slips in the map where the city decides to stop behaving like geography and start behaving like memory. Tonight's story follows Gerald Finch, a historian who believes in ledgers, records, and the comfort of things that can be verified on paper. New Orleans, as always, finds that belief adorable because some neighborhoods do not vanish. They simply move sideways. And if you walk into one by accident, the question is no longer whether it exists. The question is whether it means to let you leave. The Lantern Parish. Most cities behaved themselves. They stayed where they were built. Streets remained obedient lines on maps. A corner that existed on Monday would still exist on Thursday unless a construction crew or a flood had the bad manners to interfere. History in those places moved politely forward. New Orleans had never been particularly interested in polite behavior. Here, the river shifted, foundations settled, buildings leaned toward one another year by year, as if exchanging private gossip over iron balconies. Sometimes the streets themselves seemed to wander. Certain alleys appeared where none had been the day before. Courtyards revealed doors no architect had recorded. A narrow lane you swore you passed yesterday refused to appear again, no matter how carefully you retraced your steps. Most of the time, the city corrected itself if you didn't fuss. The strange street emptied back onto a familiar one. Neon returned. Music leaked out of open doors. Someone handed you another drink and asked if you'd seen their dog. But every so often, the street did not correct itself. It folded inward. And when it opened again, it was no longer entirely part of the same world. Among the people who knew such things, one vanished district had a name. The Lantern Parish. Not a parish in the civic sense. Not one you would find in tax records or municipal maps. It was simply a neighborhood of New Orleans that had slipped sideways in history and never properly found its way back. The Lantern Parish was a place where the past had not ended. It had just kept going. Gerald Finch arrived in New Orleans for entirely reasonable reasons. He was a meticulous historian from Ohio, the sort of man who trusted ledgers more than legends and believed a properly labeled archive box could count as emotional nourishment. He had come to research vanished streets, demolished properties, and old structures that appeared in 19th century records, but refused to remain where the paperwork insisted they should be. The French Quarter was full of such irritations. Street names had changed, buildings had been rebuilt, divided, swallowed, merged. Yet Gerald kept finding discrepancies too specific to dismiss. Balconies that should still exist. Addresses that repeated themselves strangely through different decades. structures described in old property ledgers with enough precision to prove they had once been real, and nowhere in the modern city where they ought to stand. He mapped them all. When he asked locals about missing streets and buildings, they gave him the sort of answers historians learn to ignore. Shrugs, laughter, recommendations for bars. One bartender leaned over the counter and said, almost kindly, "Don't go looking for streets that don't want to be found." Gerald wrote that down too, intending to use it later as an example of local color. Historians are often at their most vulnerable when they think they're being ironic. On a humid October evening, Gerald went out to verify one more address before dinner. The record described a building on a narrow street near the quarter's northern edge. Distinctive iron balconies, clear enough details, straightforward work. He found the intersection easily. Streetlights glowed, music drifted from a nearby bar. The city looked ordinary, which in New Orleans should already have counted as suspicious. Then Gerald turned the corner. At first, he thought he had simply gone the wrong way. The French Quarter was good at rearranging visitors. Streets twisted, landmarks hid from one another like conspirators. But this street was wrong in deeper ways. The air smelled of lamp oil instead of beer and cooking grease. The lamps above him were gas, not electric, little trembling flames held behind glass. The road under his feet was old cobblestone, real stone worn smooth by centuries of use. The buildings on either side loomed slightly taller than they should have, iron balconies curling outward like dark vines. Shutters stood open to candlelit rooms. There were no cars, no neon, no modern noise. A carriage rolled past. A gentleman tipped a tall hat as he walked by. A couple headed toward what looked very much like an opera house were discussing a performance Gerald had never heard of. He pulled out his phone. No signal. The signal glowed obediently enough, but above the street the sky looked dimmer than it should have been, as though something invisible sat between this place and the rest of the world. Gerald took a careful breath, because historians are trained to observe before they panic, and realized with a sinking, private horror that he was not seeing a reenactment. The street was alive. He tried to step backward out of it. A hand landed on his shoulder. "Looking a little lost, friend." Gerald turned. The man behind him was tall and elegantly dressed in a dark coat, whose silver buttons caught the lamplight with unnerving precision. Everything about him seemed correct, except his face. It was too deliberate somehow, too composed, as if someone had assembled charm from excellent materials and forgotten to add the proper quantity of human uncertainty. "I was just," Gerald began. "Wandering?" the man said pleasantly. "Yes, it happens." "What is this place?" Gerald asked. The man tilted his head. "You already know, don't you?" "I asked you first." "This," the man said, gesturing lightly to the gas lamps, the murmuring pedestrians, the cobblestones, "is the Lantern Parish." "That's not possible." New Orleans is very fond of impossible things. Gerald glanced down the street and saw the same carriage returning, same horse, same driver. His pulse began to climb. How do I get out? The smile on the man's face thinned. That depends. On what? Did you walk in? Gerald hesitated. Yes? The man exhaled softly. Ah, that's unfortunate. Why? He glanced toward the lamps, as if watching something Gerald could not see. Because, he said gently, those who found their way into the Lantern Parish rarely find their way back out. Gerald did not say goodbye. Goodbyes are for people who believe a conversation is the main danger. He ran. His shoes hammered the cobblestones. Gas lamps blurred past. The buildings seemed to lean closer as he moved. He ran until his lungs burned and then slowed only because the same carriage passed him again. Same driver, same horse, same angle of the wheels. Up ahead, the same couple approached the opera house, repeating the same conversation, word for word. The street was not merely strange, it was repeating, and Gerald, with the cold clarity available only to the truly frightened, understood that the parish was holding him inside its repetition. He was becoming part of the loop. That was when a doorway appeared, where he would have sworn no doorway had been before. Dark wood, symbols carved into the surface, a crooked sign above it swaying in still air. Crew of the Morningstar. Gerald did not hesitate. He grabbed the handle and stepped through. If he expected sanctuary, he was only partially disappointed. The air inside the shop was cooler and calmer. The room smelled of old paper, herbs, dust, and the accumulated opinions of objects too strange to be called decorative. Shelves climbed the walls from floor to ceiling, crowded with books, jars, carved masks, instruments, and curios that seemed to hum faintly with memories too heavy to remain quiet. "Hello," Gerald called. A voice answered from behind the counter. "You walked into the Lantern Parish." Gerald focused on the man who stood there, perfectly still, watching him with mild interest. Ginger hair, impeccable beard, Victorian tailoring, so exact it seemed less like fashion than an insistence. Lucien Devereux looked entirely at home in a place that should not have existed, and therefore, Gerald thought with sudden resentment, exactly like the kind of man one would least like to need. "You have to help me," Gerald said. Lucien Devereux considered this. "Do I?" "Please." Lucien studied him a moment longer. "You walked into the Lantern Parish," he repeated, as though diagnosing the nature of a stain. "Unfortunate. How do I leave?" That earned Gerald a smile so faint it would have been kinder if it had not appeared at all. Lucien reached beneath the counter and brought up an old brass lantern. Its glass was slightly smoky, as though it remembered many different flames. "That's it?" Gerald asked. "The Lantern Parish obeys certain rules," Lucien said. "The streets change constantly. Turn left twice, and you may arrive 3 years earlier. Turn right, and you might walk in a circle until sunrise. Occasionally, one stumbles into a street that never quite ends. And this helps. Only one path leads back to the living city. Lucian pushed the lantern toward him. This will show it to you. Gerald picked it up. It was heavier than it ought to have been. Lucian struck a match and lit the wick. A soft gold flame bloomed inside. If the flame turns gold, he said, you are walking the correct direction. And if it doesn't? Lucian's eyes brightened with the faintest trace of amusement. If it flickers blue, something in the parish has noticed you. Gerald waited. What happens then? Lucian's smile returned, thin and perfectly mannered. Then, he said pleasantly, I recommend running. Gerald stepped back into the Lantern Parish. It had already changed. The air felt denser. The people were wrong in subtler ways now. A gentleman moved with a slight delay between intention and action, as though his body needed an extra half-second to remember obedience. A woman lifted her hand to wave, and the smile arrived a beat too late, like a puppet whose strings had crossed. Gerald tightened his grip on the lantern. Gold. He began walking. One corner, then another. Different buildings. Same oppressive air. The lantern continued to burn gold. That was enough to keep him moving until he realized the figures on the street had started turning toward him, one by one. It didn't happen all at once. That would have been mercifully obvious. No, it happened slowly, with intimate attention, heads angling, eyes fixing, entire rows of impossible pedestrians adjusting themselves to account for him. Gerald stopped. Inside the lantern, the flame shivered. Gold, then blue. The street fell silent. The change happened with the quiet inevitability of a distant door being closed. Every figure froze where it stood. The gentleman mid-step became a posed sculpture of motion. The couple heading to the opera house stopped in the middle of a sentence that would never finish. The gas lamps dimmed until only the lantern cast light. A thin, trembling circle in a street made suddenly vast. The shadows began to stretch. Gerald felt it before he heard or saw anything. A cold pressure gathered at the back of his neck, intimate as a hand and far less human. The parish had noticed him, not the people in it, not the repetition, the place itself. He ran. The lantern swung wildly in his grip. The flame flashed gold again, and he nearly sobbed with relief. But the next turn took him into blue. He cut down another street, gold, another corner, blue. The parish was no longer merely surrounding him. It was adjusting. Behind him, something followed. It wasn't footsteps or claws. It wasn't even breath exactly. It was a distortion, as though the street itself had begun breathing in order to keep pace. Gerald's lungs burned. He turned another corner, then another, nearly slipping on the stones, the lantern banging against his leg. Gold again. He did not trust it. Blue again. The shadows behind him thickened, patient and hungry, like a hunter already acquainted with the ending. Then the flame burst suddenly into bright gold. Ahead of him, something familiar opened in the darkness. Bourbon Street. It was not old cobblestone. It was not gas lamps. It was modern pavement, electric neon, music crashing out of bar doors, human laughter, vulgar and wonderful. The noise felt almost violent after the muffled hunger of the parish. Gerald lunged forward. Behind him, the old street had already begun to thin, the gas lamps weakening, the cobblestones turning reflection pale, as if the parish were withdrawing its hand from the world. The instant Gerald's foot hit the pavement of Bourbon Street, it vanished. Humidity returned, car horns, neon, somebody staggering out of a bar while laughing too loud at something unimportant. Gerald collapsed against a brick wall and filled his lungs with stale bourbon, hot pavement, and the general foul bouquet of a living world, as though it were fresh mountain air. When he finally looked down, the lantern was still in his hand. A faint thread of blue danced once across the glass. Then the flame went out. Gerald Finch never found the Lantern Parish again. He spent weeks trying. He walked the same streets, turned the same corners, checked his notes against city maps and old ledgers. Nothing opened. Nothing answered. The lantern remained stubbornly dark, refusing either gold or blue. He finished his research. His book included a chapter he never submitted to his publisher. 37 pages on a vanished district existing outside time. He left it out. Historians, after all, must maintain certain reputations. Elsewhere in the quarter, Lucien Devereaux locked up the crew of the Morningstar for the night. Inside, the shop settled into its own private quiet. Outside, the city shifted almost imperceptibly. Somewhere, a narrow alley ran a little longer than it should have. Somewhere, a corner took its time deciding what century it belonged to. Lucien noticed. He adjusted his cuffs and went on with his evening, because in New Orleans, such things happened. You've been listening to Tongue of the Serpent. That was The Lantern Parish, a story about lost streets, living memory, and the particular danger of believing a map is the same thing as a city. In New Orleans, some places do not disappear because they are gone. They disappear because they have developed preferences. And once a place notices you, escaping it and understanding it are rarely the same achievement. Until next time, trust your instincts. Mistrust convenient corners, and if a lantern in the dark ever turns blue, take the hint and run.